a second or two. Um, so I'll kind of get us started in general with things as folks are still joining in. So my name is Heidi Latire. I am a customer success manager here at Cloverleaf. So today we'll be talking about Culture Pulse and motivating values. We do one of these assessment webinars once a month. We've gone through a good majority of them now. I think we've only got like 3 more left. And we've got one scheduled for next month as well on StrengthScope. So I will send a notice about that one. Some of you may not have access to StrengthScope. It is one of our partners that we do require a little bit of an upgrade in order to get access to it, but we felt that it would be great for everyone to see that and get a good taste of it. We're big fans of StrengthScope, and so that's coming next month, and I will send out a registration link for that one. And then also we do have a business practice type webinar each month as well. And we also have one of those scheduled. I think we just had one earlier this month. That's typically the first week of June. These assessment ones, I don't have a set week of the month that these are currently on, just because we get different speakers. So we do typically try to have these Friday around noon Eastern time. But beyond that, I don't really have a set week, but the business ones are typically the first week of the month. And then we also have one just for our coaches, talking a little bit different perspective. So 3 webinars a month on average. Sometimes we combine the business ones and the coach ones. So we did that last month. So yeah, so we'll see. I'll send those out in the chat. You'll also see those sent in an email as well. And if you're ever wondering what's coming up, there is the chat bot on the bottom right corner in the system. That's got all of our news releases. It's got all of upcoming webinars, any blog posts that's been posted. So, and really that's our support desk as well. So if you ever have an issue with the system, have a question, all of our help docs are in there as well, but you can get a hold of our support folks there as well. So I think I stalled enough for other folks to jump on. So with that, I will introduce Scott. Scott Dust is one of our awesome colleagues here at Cloverleaf, is our chief research officer. And we'll be talking a lot about our culture pulse and motivating values, how to use that in Cloverleaf, and what really are these assessments and why are they important, and how you might use them within your organization. So Scott, I'll let you go.
Thank you. I appreciate the generous introduction. And thank you, Heidi, for all that you do. For those that haven't met Heidi yet, she really is a assessment ninja. She knows anything and everything about these assessments. So in many cases, she's probably just as well versed in how they can be used and leveraged for our clients and for our coaches and coachees. And we appreciate all the work you do, Heidi. So by way of background, coming at this from like my perspective of assessments at large, I am an academic by training. So I'm a faculty member, a professor in the management department at the University of Cincinnati in the Linder College of Business. And all of my training is in organizational psychology, organizational behavior. And I've played this publisher perish game evaluating all sorts of different types of behavior, motivation, values, culture, strengths, traits, you name it. All the assessments on our platform are things that I've been researching and trying to understand better from an evidence-based perspective for a long time. And setting aside the academic career, when I started working with Cloverleaf, I think what is really amazing is how well they do at taking all of this evidence-based material and putting it into a format that is personalized, actionable, and dynamic. And that's really what we're shooting for. Is we don't want these statics to be just we don't want these assessments to just be this static phenomenon. What really is important is translating all of this theory and research and understanding of the foundations to make it practical, make it usable, make it something that's actually going to change behavior, increase engagement, allow people to learn more about themselves. And so I offer that background because I do want to get into a little bit of the technical aspects of what is culture and what exactly do we mean by values, and kind of lay that foundation, but also dive into the specifics of these assessments. What is the dimensionality? What are all the terminologies, and how do we understand what that means when we're discussing different scores on different assessments? And then finally, save some space for some conversations about, okay, what do we do with all this? Like, how do you use it? And what are best practices? And hopefully everybody that's participating can also be a part of that conversation. I would love to get more chats, hand raises, whatever it takes to, field questions and make sure that this is a discussion that is outsourcing some of the ideas and directions of the conversations to the listeners. So with that, let's dive into the first component of Culture Pulse. I'm just showing you agenda first before we get into Culture Pulse. And I really do want to set up some time for Q&A in between. So I'm going to watch the time here and try to make sure that we split it so that we have equal time for each assessment, Culture Pulse, as well as motivating values. And then within each one of those two splits, I'll save some time for Q&A at the end of each. But feel free to interject before we get to that Q&A section. That is welcomed and encouraged. So Culture Pulse, let's dive right in. But let's start off with some definitions. That's where some of this background and theory is going to help. I would like to hear everybody else's interpretation of this prompt. What exactly do we mean by organizational culture? In your own terms, type it out, give an example, whatever it is that you think is relevant. What is organizational culture? And then I'll give you a few of my my recommended dimensions of culture here. Let's see if we can get a few. Don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
This is great. The way we go about doing things around here. I love that. It's good. The way we go about doing things around here. I think I have one that's eerily similar to that. Language we use, norms we set, right? Norms, values, common practices, socio-moral climate, how we interact with each other. All those are fantastic. How people interact. Right? So getting a lot at this interaction, how we treat each other, what are the expectations? All these are brilliant, right on. So here's the three big, I think, evidence-based perspectives that are out there that I think are representative of everything that we're taking away from some of these comments. Values, norms, and expectations regarding attitudes and behaviors. Yes, that's essentially what was said in the chat. And these attitudes and behaviors, think of those as kind of like the outcomes, right? The things that we react to and the way that we actually behave after we have some type of input, whether it's a specific value, expectation, or socio-normative expectation. And I think this is exactly what Russell was commenting on, the way things are done around here. That is a colloquial term that's used a lot, right? It's just, what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do based upon all of these things going around that's being socialized within your organizational setting. And there's this last great comment that I love. There's this researcher named Ben Schneider who wrote probably the seminal article that started this conversation about organizational culture decades ago. And it was "The people make the place." And I love that we were getting some of the comments earlier that we're talking about, well, it's the interactions among people. It's just how we all get along and what we do and how we treat each other. And absolutely. And the underlying philosophy being that really culture comes down to the people and what do they believe in and what are their expectations? And as you get more and more and more of those people within a social structure, that becomes the culture. And that is the basis of culture as we talk about in Culture Pulse, but with a twist. And the twist being that it is our preferences about culture. So Culture Pulse is really specific to understanding at the individual perspective, and we're talking about work, of course, what are their preferences as it relates to a variety of different dimensions of culture, right? So a lot of times we might assess culture, and there's plenty of great organizational culture assessments that are out there that are more so trying to get a handle on what is the culture currently? And you ask everybody in the organization to rate, the degree to which they agree or disagree on all these different dimensional elements that might be representative of their culture. And that's one approach. But that's more of a diagnosis. That's kind of saying at the org level, what is it that we represent or what we are? And then from there comes like a gap analysis. Okay, here's where we want to be and here's what people think we are. but that's something different. What Culture Pulse is representing is for each specific individual, how do they prefer to engage in interactions? How do they prefer to engage in the way that they work and the way they get things done, which allows you to be able to get a better feel for approaching other people and interacting with other people, whether it be your manager, your peers, etc. So our approach to Pulse very much aligns with the mission of thriving teams and allowing people to do their best work. So there are 6 different dimensions of Culture Pulse, and we'll go through each one and we'll make sure that we flesh it out and understand what that means and represents. And then we'll dive right into the Q&A. Actually, I'll show a visual that might help with a little Q&A and get some ideas flowing that is about a team that I'm on within Cloverleaf, or a sub-team in Cloverleaf, and it shows our Culture Pulse dispersion visually. So the first dimension is organizational effectiveness. And this comes down to 2 different facets or different poles, if you prefer to be means or goal-oriented as it relates to organizational effectiveness. And in italics here, where it says the facet of task that motivates, that's really what this is representing, right? So these are the bullet point highlights that will help you understand this dimension. So those that are more mean-oriented, they're people focused on processes, where those that are goal-oriented, they're more focused on results. So when you think of effectiveness, right, like what is it that motivates you to be effective? Is it really on that end result? Like, what are we heading? And it doesn't matter how we get there. That's more that goal orientation. Or it's more so about means, where it's about process. I want to know if I'm doing it right, making sure that I do the right things to get to that point. As an example, I had, believe it or not, a long time ago, I tried to be in sales when I first graduated from college, and it didn't work out very well. Hence the transition to be an academic. And the mantra of 2 very different sales personnels within our division was that when it's all said and done, like, the score is all that matters, right? Did you sell? How much revenue did you bring in? And I don't care how you got there. It's means oriented. Or excuse me, goal oriented. The means oriented mantra, the manager that I actually really appreciated, was that it was all about how you got there, right? As long as you're making the calls and you're showing up every day and you're doing the right things and you're saying the right message and you're thinking about the value and you're listening, he brought it down to the more micro processes that if you do those right, it will lead to that end result. So 2 very different approaches, but both work when it comes to trying to understand what motivates people to be more effective. Second dimension is audience orientation. And this audience orientation can be either internal or external. There's these 2 different poles of internal and external. And the summary statement is that it's the reaction to, whether it's a customer, client, audience, something external, right? What do we do in terms of internalizing the perspectives of those that are external? So on the low end, internal would be, I kind of believe more so in my intuition, and I am motivated to think about the things that I've come up with that maybe others haven't. Where those that are externally motivated, they very much love to talk to clients, talk to audiences, talk to customers, and that is the greatest source of truth. An example within our organization, Kirsten Moorfield, who is our co-founder, one time I asked her, what is your favorite thing to do while at work? Like, what really is just like your absolute number one favorite task? Because she has to do a lot of stuff as a co-founder that's not so fun. She's like, you know what? My ideal day is when I talk to customers, just interviewing them, asking them questions, sitting on a virtual call, asking a gazillion questions. And honestly, as her being like the COO and the co-founder, that's probably the worst use of her time. However, she loves it so much because she's so externally driven. Like, and that's her way of going about getting things done and understanding what's the right thing to do. That's the biggest source of truth. Where on the other end of the spectrum, people are more so motivated by really kind of having their own perspective, their own original ideas that others would have never come up with, right? 2 very different sources of understanding an audience and how to use that material.
What's so interesting about that, Scott, is that Kirsten's an introvert.
Yeah.
So it's not, I think that's just interesting because it's not the same thing. She does still need that quiet time, and most
Mm-hmm.
of her interviews, she'll record those and we'll take a look at those in client in meetings in general. We just saw some this week actually, and 9 times out of 10, it's in her home because she's working from home because
Yeah.
she's an introvert and she gets more
Yep.
energy just being home by herself and getting things done there. So that
Hmm.
I think that's interesting too, that it's not the same thing. It's different to be, you can be an
That's a good point.
introvert and still be externally driven when it comes to folks around you.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and that's part of what I love about now I'm kind of getting into, you're prompting me into a whole nother conversation. Like the reason it is so important to have more than one assessment
Oh yeah.
is because you can kind of piece apart all these different, what I would call profiles, right? If we only look at one assessment at a time, right now we're only talking about culture preferences, but what about all of the other things, the strengths, the traits, the performance factors, all, or the energy factors? Yes, totally agree. Okay, third dimension, organizational control. So the two different poles are loose versus strict. This is all about controlling outcomes. How do you prefer to control your outcomes? So when you're loose, it's all about embracing this sense of adaptiveness, innovation, creativity. You like the unpredictable, you like the chaos theory way of going about getting things done, versus those that have this mentality of strict control. They really are all about efficiency and planning and making sure that you're kind of exploiting the efficiencies you've created. Interestingly, organizational control is studied a lot at the organization level in terms of strategy. And so, for example, people might argue, there's lots of academics that made a career out of arguing that the best mentality is that you want a loose orientation when you're trying to grow and you're trying to take new market share. And then once you've established that market share, then you want to be a strict orientation where you're really exploiting the efficiencies, right? You're the Walmarts of the world, where you really just already are kind of creating economies of scale and being more and more efficient. Kind of bring that down a level and think about how you operate as an individual, right? How do you like to get things done, or what level of control do you like to have built into your system of work? And a lot of times people might have a strong preference for one of the other. It doesn't say you might change from time to time depending upon your setting, but people do have tendencies that tend to gravitate towards one or the other. Next dimension is group identity. It's a really interesting one, where they're really getting at this sense of, with whom do I identify the most? And by identification is, I see myself in them. I kind of find myself being attracted to this way of thinking and this way of life, or whatever it might be. That's where the identity theory research comes from. And the two dimensions being, or excuse me, the two poles being community versus professional. It's almost easier to understand the professionally focused, because that's really about understanding, those that you're similar to as it relates to your profession, your title, the specific work that you do, and you really strongly believe in this sense of identity as it relates to the things they do and they believe in, and their way of life. So, for example, I kind of have two conflicting identities. I have the identity of being an academic, right? And we think this way and we approach work in this specific way. But I also have my academic as a team member for a startup. And we have a very different way of kind of going about getting things done and solving problems and trying to conquer the world. And so that sense of, okay, this is what these professional identities typically embody. And so I carry that on, and I believe it's important that I relate to that too. That's one sense of the pole. And the other end being this sense of just who they surround themselves with, maybe outside of work, but not related necessarily to a profession. And that can create lots of differences in how people behave or acclimatize to the socialization within an organizational setting. Next is personal approachability. I love this graphic that our awesome graphic designer found. I thought that was funny. These guys giving each other some bro love there. Okay, so approachability versus guarded are the two poles, and the ideal explanation, if you had to distill it down to one term: reaction to personal questions and stories. So when you're at work, I think this is almost the easiest for people to kind of latch onto and understand. How comfortable are you with personal stories or personal questions, right? Or do you want to kind of keep it more guarded, which is fine too. So those that are more approachable, totally fine given access to personal information about their self within these work settings. And I'll admit that I'm probably farther along the line here. Sometimes I might say to myself, maybe that was too much information. Maybe they didn't really want to hear, everything going down about, all the family battles going on at Thanksgiving. Where other people might be more guarded, where it's like, this is work and I'm, fine being friendly and social, but at the same time, like I have boundaries for what I'm comfortable exposing within these personal settings. And people tend to be, on these different poles. One kind of interesting nuance is that sometimes you do get people that are more guarded, but then there might be one specific person or maybe two specific people where they can be a little bit more comfortable and approachable with. But in general, they tend to kind of default to one of these two extremes. And finally, management philosophy. So management philosophy, how do you prefer to be managed? How do you appreciate this, this supportiveness and motivated to get the most out of your work based upon your interaction with your supervisor? Do you prefer them to be more helpful in terms of support or helpful in terms of helping set and establishing measures of performance and benchmarks? So if you're more support oriented, you really want this person right next to you at all times, inspiring you, working with you, being collaborative on a day-to-day basis. Versus the other side, it's like, you just tell me the goal, help me create a really specific, actionable goal with appropriate benchmarks, and then please get out of my way. I tend to be the latter. I'm more that performance oriented. Like, let's work together to set a goal, and I'll see you in 6 months, and then we'll look at it. And I'll let you know, when I need some support or I have a question. But tend to have some pretty strong feelings one way or the other. Okay, so here's what Culture Pulse looks like for myself and a sub team, as we would call it within Cloverleaf. So the one way we have it set up is, and I would encourage a lot of people to do this as well, right? That anytime you're working with a specific group of people on a semi-regular basis, set up a sub team so that you can look at just the interactions of those specific people. So this is our contextual coaching team. It's myself. It's two of our newer employees that are really focused on infusing all sorts of different approaches to contextualizing the insights that we receive. Very technical people. And then Peggy Murner, who is in charge of our content. And the four of us together work a lot together. And so we've set up this sub team to understand some of the differences here. And some of the observations I'll offer to the group, and then we'll get into the Q&A that might, hopefully this kind of sparks some ideas for what to ask. Some of the things you might notice about this specific group of people. Interestingly, we're all kind of in the middle when it comes to a means versus goal approach to organizational effectiveness. We believe in the process, but also the goal, and we're all in the middle, which kind of creates this balance, which is good. When it comes to audience orientation, you can't really see your face, but that's Peggy way out there on the right, this external orientation. And then there's all of us more so in the middle. And so as we're developing ideas and trying to coming up, she tends to be the outlier, as you might call them, statistically an outlier, and that she's a much different score than the mean, than everybody else that was within this team. And so inevitably, while all of us are thinking, no, we've got the great ideas about how to incorporate, the latest and greatest of all these algorithms of machine learning, she might be more oriented towards asking the audience, which can create potential advantages or some potential challenges. Within organizational control, we all seem to be a little bit more on the loose end, or at least moderate to loose. Within group identity, we're definitely all kind of huddled together here, in the middle, with being a little bit more community oriented. And then we're all very approachable, which can interestingly lead to a lot of challenges, because as the four of us try to get stuff done together, we're all talking about interesting things about life and not necessarily work all the time. And then our management philosophy tends to be more so skewed towards performance oriented. And seeing these differences in the dimensionality is relatively common, right? Sometimes you get all of us huddled in one direction, whether it's at one end of the pole or the other end of the pole or in the middle, which has different implications, right? If you're all huddled in the middle, you might be more balanced, but that can also lead to more maybe confusion. When you have an outlier, like in the audience orientation, maybe that person has a harder time, or the group has a harder time with that individual in some circumstances. Sometimes you get a full dispersion where everybody's all over the place, which can be, again, good and bad in terms of creating challenges with both cognitive diversity and bringing everybody together to understand what's going on. So, okay, I'd love to pause so I can get a drink of water and to hear some Q&A on what the group is interested in understanding. Any follow-up questions you might have, we'll give you some time to think about it here, but please don't be shy. All right, got our first question here. How do you respond when users share that graph? It's hard to read because the terms on the right match what is on the left. Yeah, so basically a UX question here in terms of user experience and seeing the plot. Um, this is something that actually I know that the product team has gotten feedback on before and that they have been talking about. And I'll show you what Kelly's mentioning here. So when you see organizational control and you see like loose here, right? So loose is being stated because I personally am more loose, but the team here is from loose to strict. So it's talking about like how to interpret the data visualization a little bit better. And duly noted. And this is yet another good reminder that I need to ping product team and make sure that they have that in their product roadmap. So thank you for that. Good stuff. All right. I'll take another second here. If nothing else, no worries. I'll keep moving, go to motivating values, and then could also save time, really have more time at the end for either one of the assessments, culture pulse or motivating values. All right, let's do it. Motivating values. So again, I want to hear some more prompts. What are values? We did this for organizational culture, but what do we mean by values? What do people think values actually are? In your own words. No Google searches allowed. Beliefs, principles, things that matter and are important to you. Ooh, I love that. Your internal compass. That's good. Yeah, beliefs, principles, ways of behavior that are important. Fantastic. Yeah, I would agree with all those. I think the number one thing that I saw within some of those chats that I think is representative is this idea of importance. So values are what we believe to be important to us. And there is lots of research on values. And one thing that's interesting is to remember that values are universal. Values, by definition, are things that everybody cares about, all human beings at least care about. And there's a variety of different frameworks for values. Schwartz's values and is one very popular approach when it's not work specific. There's been iterations ever since that get it specific to work context, which we focus on a little bit more. But it's really important to remember that everybody values more or less the same things. What's different though is how we prioritize our values, right? Which is much different than saying, are you, low or high on any one dimension? It's really kind of a pecking order of the extent to which we find something or some specific topic to be important to us. For motivating values, it's specific to the things that we believe to be so important, that's the values part, that they are motivating, right? They motivate us to perform in a way that they motivate us to optimally perform. So connecting this idea of motivation and values is recognizing that if we can pinpoint what people find important, we can also deduce what is going to make them more motivated. So within values, you can create kind of boundaries and constraints on like what types of values or dimension values are you really the most interested in. And motivating values is specific to this idea of what we really only care about is motivation, like motivation to perform, to be an optimal worker that is efficient and effective and doing whatever they do at work. Okay, we'll go through the same dimension approach and kind of go through each one by one, give some examples, and please don't hesitate, chat some questions. Heidi, tell me if I'm missing anything, and we'll also have time at the end to dive in. So first one is theoretical, with its two poles of intellectual versus instinctive. So intellectual is, what's important to me and what motivates me to do what I do is really getting into logic, critical thinking, looking at facts, looking at figures. And then on the other end, I really like to interpret the subjective and the more abstract, and I like to express opinions. I like to interpret and understand all those feelings. It's a little bit more intuition based. And all of these are things that different people enjoy doing very differently. Kirsten, for example, who I mentioned, loves to have this external orientation in talking with customers, is also very instinctive and kind of taking in information, but doing so not so much about like the empirics, but about people's qualitative understanding of phenomenon, and loves to get into that kind of intuition based. I am on the opposite end. So when the two of us as a dyad are working together to try and solve a problem, we come at it from very different angles. I was trained in the scientific method, and I like facts, and I like looking for statistical significance. Like that is my jam. And so we very different things that we find important and that motivate us, and inspire us when we're working through things. Next dimension is economic. You can be resourceful or you can be selfless. Resourceful is you're really interested in practical utility. It's all about kind of cost benefit analysis. You want to understand how to incrementally improve. It's a little more quantitative type of thinking. Those that fall along more so this selfless line of thinking, these are really focused on service to others, relationships with others. You really kind of want to help underserved. And both of them, I would also remind people are valid, right? Like sometimes I think people look at selfless and like, isn't that better than being resourceful? Not necessarily. We're all different, and we all are kind of equipped to do different things in different ways. Arguably, they both have kind of pros and cons, right? If you're overly selfless in a business environment, maybe you kind of overlook the fact that you still got to make profit and kind of crunch the numbers. But if you're overly resourceful oriented and you're only about economic gain, then you're kind of not really doing or serving who you're supposed to be serving. And, it's only for the wrong reasons. So, all of them kind of get balanced with each other, but it's still this recognition that we go about working and trying to insert people in different ways, and they're all valid. All right, next is aesthetic. The two dimensions here are poles, harmonious versus objective. Those that are more harmonious, they like the aesthetic in that they appreciate beauty, they appreciate creativity, they really care about detail and design and how things are constructed. And then you have those that are more objective. They are more pragmatic, practical. They really want to focus on things that have utility. And this whole slide deck is a good representation of this, right? I can assure you, I did not create this slide deck because I am objective oriented, and that's what I find important. And like, I just want to make sure I have the right content and it says the right thing with as little time and effort as possible because I'm busy. That's always kind of been my, motivating value mantra. But at the same time, we do care about brand, and our internal graphic designer, Nicole, would not let me give a presentation that only has, Times New Roman font bullet points without some type of, brand recognition to it, and recognizing the importance of visual and the importance of, presenting to the world, like how important it is to have a harmonious message from a visual standpoint. So the aesthetic is something that I think people a lot of times either don't really appreciate the other side in that perspective, but it's certainly important. Next is social. Altruistic versus intentional being the two poles. So with being altruistic, it's looking to improve the welfare of others and has this sense of social justice and fairness almost embedded in all types of social interactions and how they engage with the world at large. And then intentional is recognizing that the reality of social aspects is that there is a hierarchy, there is a system, and that, it's this, you get what you deserve, you have to put in the time and effort in order to get there. And, the sense of equity can be broken down in a variety of different ways. It's like, hey, everybody gets an equal shot. That's one perspective. But also there's a sense of equity of, well, those that put in more work and do the work should get more opportunities. And so this kind of has an overlay of this sense of altruism versus intentional, like which one is the appropriate, equitable, socially oriented lens for what's important. And I'm sure you can see many situations where those, if people are really far on each one of the poles, where that can create some conversations of interpersonal value conflict. The next is political. So commanding versus collaborative. Commanding, power, status, influence, all of those sense of control mechanisms are things that they find meaningful and they find powerful. And people differ on this sense of what's a lot of times called power distance orientation. And it also is very culturally driven as well. For example, in the US, our power distance orientation is pretty low, right? We think of people within a management hierarchy as, they have the responsibility, but we're still equal. where in some countries, Eastern in particular, they might be higher in power distance, where we respect authority and we have this sense of, I can't question things that are different than mine. And so this idea of commanding, it's this recognition that, we need that type of hierarchy, because that is important to make sure that the system runs correctly. And that's one approach to valuing the way that people work together. And then collaborative, it really is more so about the cause. It's about shunning conflict, exhibiting leadership in whatever way is necessary. It doesn't matter who it is. So anybody can step up and perform and be in charge, and we all have to work through things together, and that it's more organic, and that things can happen from the ground up. And both of them are valid, and both of them are reasonable in terms of how the world should operate. And then regulatory is structured versus receptive. So structured means following codes of conduct, being cooperative, self-controlled, where receptive, more so independent, individualistic, and uses rationalization and justification. So think of it as like a self-regulatory type of mechanism, where those that are structured, they really like this idea of, hey, there's specific policies, goals, rules, those kind of help dictate what is the right behavior at any one point in time. Where those that are a little bit more receptive might be a little more of the humanist perspective. Everybody to each their own, use whatever you think is the right rationale and justification for doing what needs to be done. And you can kind of see this play out, especially in organizations where some people might, feel very uncomfortable getting outside of the rules and policies if there are none in place, where they get into the gray area. So that would be the kind of the more high structured orientation, versus those that are more on the receptive end might feel stifled by too many rules and policies and procedures, and feel more comfortable in some of those gray areas where there's nothing established, in order to make sure they know what to do and when to do it. So another fun breakdown, there's a little bit more dispersion in our contextual coaching team as it relates to motivating values, but another good representation of the different outlays of a group in terms of a team perspective on any one specific characteristic. Peggy, again, there she is, the outlier on the theoretical dimension. She's a little bit more instinctive, where inevitably I have two software engineers and myself, an academic, that are higher on the intellectual aspect with all the facts and figures. And then when it came to the economic, we're all in the moderate to high range as it goes towards the selflessness versus the resourceful angle. But I'm the one that's a little bit more objective and goal-focused, resource-focused for that specific dimension. Get a decent dispersion for aesthetic, decent dispersion for social. We're kind of all hovering in the middle for political, somewhere between the low moderate to high moderate for each. And then all of us are pretty far on the extreme for structured. So it's kind of important to understand these dimensions, because it enables you to do a deeper dive for each specific dispersion as well, right? If you were to just kind of lump all these together and say, hey, how similar are these four people on their motivating values? You might not get a whole lot of value out of it. But if you can break it down into these specific dimensions, you can find the biggest source of potential challenge, or find the biggest potential opportunity to exploit some cognitive diversity or value diversity or preference diversity, to make sure that your team is doing the best they can to interact and operate together. All right, move to a Q&A. And it can be either one, culture pulse or motivating value. We're to make sure we set enough time for both. Let's see. Don't be shy. All right, got a few questions. Leah, thank you. Let's see, and a question about the recording. Yeah, let Heidi answer that one. A few questions. Remind me what the source assessment is for this company that Cloverleaf uses for motivating assessment. Yep, that is Cleaver Corporation. Cleaver Corporation has been our partner for both DISC and motivating values. And so they purchased the intellectual property to these two assessments years ago, and have been using it in their own practice. And then we've partnered with them to have access to that assessment. And interestingly, and they're a great partner, and we've done a lot of research on our assessments. And just by pure size, we have a huge sample size of users that are taking our assessments. We've been actually able to kind of report back, some potential tweaks as they go through 2.0 and they start to iterate and make it even better for the future. So they've been a great partner of ours for that assessment. Culture Pulse is one that we developed ourselves. There's a variety of different culture theories that are out there. And so basically, we just looked at the literature on culture and developed the framework of these 6 dimensions to say these are the most relevant dimensions when coming at this from our lens of Cloverleaf, which is we want to help team members work better together. We want to help every team thrive. So what are the best dimensions to evaluate in terms of a cultural preference that will be informative for helping people work better together? And so that one's kind of a hodgepodge of a variety of different theories within the organizational culture space of academia. And then number 2, if no bar to either side, does that indicate dead center and different value on a spectrum? Yeah, great question. So if you're in the middle on one of these 2 assessments, right, you're more in the moderate range, it probably means a few different things, or it could mean one of a few different things. It could mean that you really are relatively indifferent on the 2. It could also mean that you are relatively extreme on one end or the other across a variety of different scenarios or contexts. And then when you average it all together, you're in the middle. And so what that means is that, when someone is in that moderate range, what you need to kind of be aware of is this recognition that this individual is one of those 2. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally fine. It's almost similar to being an ambivert on the extroversion introversion scale, where there might be some scenarios where they really are extroverted and there's some scenarios they really feel introverted. So it's a matter of figuring out what are those contexts or those situations in which one pole or the other resonates. And in some situations, they really just are in the middle, and that means something else. So it's fine to be indifferent. It's fine to be both. But getting at which one is it is the key follow-up question as a coach or consultant. And then next, is there a resource anywhere that highlights some questions to discuss or probe based on team dispersion? Yeah, that's great. I think I know I have some. We can afterwards kind of compile a list. I think everyone probably has their own prompt list that they've kind of developed through client interactions over time. And I've got a handful that are pretty simple and straightforward that I purposely put them together to be generalized so that it would apply to any assessment that we have. Actually, I think it's by category because there's kind of 2 different groups of assessments and how they manifest. So we'll make sure that we send up some follow-up for that as well.
Yeah.
All
Every
right.
time I love when folks ask for different materials because then that gets me my material list fuller. So if you all ever need anything as far as like currently we're working on some activities. A lot of times we get oh, we love Cloverleaf, but we get the insights through the email. What else? And so we're working on some of those things too. So anytime you have any of those types of questions or you need those types of materials, feel free to reach out to your CSM, and we love hearing that because that just gives us an idea of what you all need. So,
yeah, very good. Next question was on from Michelle. Hi, Michelle. One question on motivating values. If you are drafting HR policies, how do you craft in such a way that supports an org that may be half structured and half receptive? That's great. So let's go back to that one. Whoops. Let's see. A little delay here. Here we go. Okay, so let's say you got an organization trying to develop HR policies and suggestions for like, this is the way things are done around here. And interestingly, the organizational structure, like the way that you set up your hierarchy and your policies and procedures, that really does flow down to a variety of different things, organizational culture, as well as what people find important, or in some cases, the things that the organization is signaling as important, which also can influence individuals' values within that organizational setting. My take for HR policies at large is that you almost want to appreciate all, and that you don't necessarily want to exclude anybody from doing whatever they find to be important. So if you find that you really kind of have a workforce that is half and half, allowing them to have base codes of conduct that are still interpretable with some degree of variability is going to make sure that you kind of hit both to some degree, right? You want some structure in there, but at the same time, you want to give people the benefit of the doubt that they're going to use those rules and those procedures in ways that they feel the most comfortable with. And so you're kind of getting everybody a little bit of what they want, as opposed to none of what either party wants. That would be probably my ideal strategy. All right, next question. What, if any, is the connection between motivating values and character strengths? Okay, so VIA character strengths is interestingly about, so VIA stands for values in action. And the underlying theory behind it, and almost like the rationale for creating it, was that they were very interested in understanding societal values at large, right? This whole initiative towards borderline like impact on the world, and like how can we all be our best self. So it really kind of had this like foundation of values, but in reality, the assessment is a strength assessment, and strengths really mean your ability to leverage your innate knowledge, skills, and abilities in ways that enable you to succeed. So the things that you do really well, and you want to continue to kind of double down on those strengths. So although it had this like underlying value orientation to it, it really is worded and assessed in a way that is definitely strengths. And so interestingly, like the strengths finder and strength scope, those are very broad on purpose. Like they hit all of the different types of strengths. Like they're not being exclusive of any strength. The whole goal was to be inclusive of every reasonable strength. Where VIA has a kind of a specific filter, where it only wanted strengths that are specific to a more values type of conversation, right? Like hope and purpose and things like that. So I would say there's not a whole lot of overlap, other than the fact that there's this kind of values orientation at its core of character strengths. I consider them very different. I would use motivating values as a sense of what people want in their work and how they like to be treated, where I would use VIA character strengths as a mechanism for ensuring that you allow people to do the work that they find fulfilling and that they're going to be very effective at doing. So both important, but a little bit different. And a follow-up question, are they measuring broadly the same thing? Yeah, so think of measurement as being, for values, it's really all about prioritization. Like how important is it? So here's all the values, now rank order each one, like 1, 2, 3, and 4, or something like that. And that's how values should really be evaluated. Where character strengths, you could do it, a variety of different ways, but a good way to do it is just using a traditional Likert scale, like agree to disagree that this is something that you find to be something that you're good at doing. So I think the measurement is representative of these two different types of scales. Values is importance and ranking, and strengths is the extent to which you're capable of. All right, very good. I don't currently have access to the assessments. I'm going to tell you how to get those sorted, please. Are you answering that one?
Yep.
Yeah.
And Leah had a question in the Q&A, and I answered some of it, but I think her question is the 50 score in general. She's talking more about MBTI, but and that's why I answered that part. But I think talking a little bit more about how the 50 score works, and I think the other part of her question is more about the reports. For those of you who may not know exactly what Leah's speaking to, basically MBTI and DISC, and they both have reports that go with us. Our behavioral assessments have reports that go along with them. A couple other ones do as well. We don't have reports for motivating values or culture pulse, mainly because it's just, there's not that much depth that you need to go into there. But I don't know, Scott, you might be able to speak to more reasons of why we won't have any, or if we will get some. But for MBTI, our 16 types, DISC, and Enneagram, we do have those. and you can score in a 50-ish, or around the, or a 50 for 16 types and disc. What the report then reflects is it has to pick one. And so it flows one, kind of picks one side or the other. And I don't really know the exact math behind that. I'd have to probably talk to the engineers, unless you know, Scott. But that is a great question of what sort of causes them to then show up on a certain report one way. But maybe you can speak a little bit more to why you would get a 50, and is that, a correct way of doing it?
Yeah, yeah, great question. So in terms of like why there's not more reports, I think it's just a matter of prioritization. Like, how many people are on the assessment and how many people are asking for it, because there's quite a laundry list of requests for a platform and with this many users. But it's always good to know how passionate people are about getting and using specific assessments. And then in terms of getting a 50, like every assessment's a little bit different. So each assessment, I think it depends on the initial scoring that was created. It depends on whether it's our assessment or whether it's assessment that was created by one of our assessment partners. And so, in some cases we can take liberties on, like, if it's a 50, do we want to move it to be one or the other, or we just want to show it in one way or the other? And honestly, every assessment's different, I think, in what the rationale and what the logic is for why we choose one or the other. It's probably too much for this conversation, but we can answer each specific assessment and say, here's the rationale behind each one if needed in a future call. Yeah. Let's see, got about 5 minutes. So another thing that came up: any connection between these two assessments and positive psychology? So culture polls, no, but character strengths, actually, that you were speaking to, the VIA, that is actually similar authors. Seligman was one of the originators of that specific theory and that specific scale that is very much about, we're not trying to diagnose what's wrong with people. We're trying to help make the most of what they have and what they are doing well, and kind of maximize that and uplift that. And interestingly, like that's this whole positive psychology movement is representative of what Cloverleaf is trying to do at large, right? Like, all of our assessments purposefully are built with the mindset of, we only are assessing things with neutral dimensions. It doesn't matter if you're way on that side or way on that side. We want to represent cognitive diversity and help people understand that not everybody is the same as you, and how do you work together to make sure that you can be a superpower. We really kind of have this philosophy of, we're not trying to assess anything that says, you're good or bad on a specific dimension. That's performance management software. Right? We are more interested in development, leadership development, growth, and learning. And everybody has their unique capabilities to get there. So I'm glad you brought that up, so I can make that prime in there. For DISC, here's another question from Leah. For DISC, it doesn't matter because top two are that's more specific to the 50-50 question. All right, let's see if I missed anything in here.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Mentioned, John had said it was the best description of distinction between the assessments. So yeah, this is why we love Scott. He brings such a different perspective because he is the academic, but can speak our language, which we all joke in Cloverleaf that we all want to just attend. Scott is also obviously a professor at University of Cincinnati here. And one of these days, I'm just going to show up in class and be a fly on the wall, because I think I would have loved to have taken his classes in college. I think we would have all have attended probably all of them and maybe not skipped as many, right? So
tell my current students that. I appreciate you saying that.
They don't know
appreciate
what
you saying that. I appreciate that, and thank you. And I think it is important, like, getting these different deep dives on each assessment is really important, because the decision of which assessments you choose is going to really dictate, like, how much variability in the conversations that you could have. And this might be a good time to kind of prime in with what my opinion is on, like, what you should try and have clients take. Like, the top 3 traits that we have in the system of 16 types, DISC, Enneagram, those are traditional behavior traits, being, behavioral consistency across time and place. And I would argue you definitely want at least one of those so that your users have all those trait-based assessments, which are very strongly related to behaviors. And there's a lot of content, a lot of insight. I would also strongly recommend having at least one of the strengths-based assessments, such as the VIA or StrengthsFinder or StrengthScope. And then I would also recommend having at least one in the other category, which is more about culture or motivational drivers, which is exactly what we're talking about here. So, it's hard to rank order those three, but arguably, after traits, which one's more important to you if you have to choose between strengths and more of these like culture / motivating values type assessments? Or if you have room for three, you should try and get one from each one of those three buckets. Because if you do, just like Heidi gave a great example of earlier when talking about trait-based extroversion, introversion versus external versus internal audience orientation, right? To get that full scope of why is somebody engaging in a certain behavior from a variety of different angles, whether it's strengths or traits or culture, that is important. Oh, somebody was asking for the three buckets. So yes, the three general buckets I'd recommend: traits. So that's DISC, 16 types, Enneagram. Second bucket, strengths, which is VIA, StrengthScope, StrengthsFinder. Third bucket, something in what I would call the culture bucket, probably is the best descriptor: culture pulse, motivating values, because values more or less are representative of culture, or instinctive drives as well as another option, because that's also kind of getting at motivational drivers, probably more similar to motivating values than culture pulse. But within those buckets, I think those are important. Yeah, that'd be my recommendation.
And I know we're getting close to time, so I just wanted to mention this has been recorded. And so everyone that's registered for the everyone that's registered for the this webinar will get a recording, and we will be sending out the slides along with that. You can also find this recording in the little chat bot down in the right hand corner. If you go to news and scroll to the bottom, there's all the recordings of our past webinars and links to those that are coming up as well. So that is how that goes. I also put the registration in the chat as well of those upcoming webinars. And if anybody has any questions about those, just feel free to let me know. And Mark had one more question about, can Culture Pulse pre-set group reports? Oh, can the present group reports? We don't have reports for Culture Pulse or motivating values. But it is on the team dashboard. So yeah. Any other questions? Great. Well, we thank everyone for coming. And like I said, the recording will be sent out with the slides. And if you have anything else, just let me know. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
See ya.
Scott.
Bye-bye. Thank you.